Thank you and good evening, everyone. I am not David Smith, but his much better looking and more Scottish Executive Director, Ross Easton. I'm sorry David can't be with us tonight. Thank you for joining us both online and in person here in this fantastic auditorium, and thank you to SP Energy Networks for the use of this wonderful facility. For those of you unfamiliar with Energy Networks Association, we're the industry body representing the UK and Ireland's energy networks. Our members operate the wires and pipes which power and heat your homes, businesses and communities. Our members employ 45,000 people across the UK and Ireland who keep your energy flowing. And as we move towards 2050 and 2045 here in Scotland, it's those very same people who are unlocking net zero and turning government policy into tangible climate action. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Scotland's largest city and to SP Energy Networks headquarters here in Glasgow for what promises to be an insightful evening. I'm delighted that we're joined by a lineup of policy, climate and business experts to discuss how policy is energising climate action. I'm excited to welcome our panellists, each of whom brings a unique perspective to the domestic and international policy challenge of stopping climate change and delivering net zero. Joining us tonight is the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister of Australia, Audrey Zibleman from Google X's electric grid Moonshot, Guy Jefferson, Chief Operating Officer of SP Energy Networks, and internationally recognised climate policy expert and lawyer Farhana Yamin, who, rumour has it, was the one who coined the phrase net zero. And of course our chair, leading broadcaster and journalist Samira Ahmed. Our guests have all made hugely positive contributions to the fight against climate change, and their perspectives will help us all understand how good policy can be an effective tool for progress. COP26 President Alok Sharma has described the summit as a turning point for climate change. As the name of our event suggests, the decisions being made by world leaders just 0.7 miles away, and yes, I have checked on Google Maps, have the potential to change the course of history. Tonight's discussion will explore the role policy can play in turbocharging our climate ambitions, unleashing innovation to help decarbonise our energy system to meet our international obligations. COP26 is a massive milestone and opportunity for the UK and Ireland and our energy networks to demonstrate incredible progress and to encourage countries around the world to scale up their ambitions too. This is the third and final event run by Energy Networks Association in the past month in the run-up to COP and of course during the summit itself. Last month we delved into the supply chains and resources of the future and the export markets the UK and Ireland's networks are helping to build. The consistent message underpinning each of these events has been that clear political ambition acts as a foundation for innovation and investment. In order to reach net zero, we need to get the right technologies in the right place at the right time. This is essential so that we can scale up our world-leading work on renewables and begin to tackle the decarbonisation of hard-to-reach sectors like heat, heavy transport and industry. And this starts with good policy. Earlier this year, Britain's energy networks brought forward over £300 million of early investment in our green recovery from COVID-19. Working with energy regulator Ofgem, our members unlocked funding to power innovative green projects up and down the country. This funding has allowed some exciting projects to get connected quicker, including plans to boost electric vehicle charging points in rural places, innovative plans for electric flight in Orkney, and even bolstered capacity in central Glasgow right here to power COP26. We're now working together as an industry to make sure that the UK government's recently announced heat and building strategy, hydrogen strategy and net zero strategy delivers the right tools for us to continue to get the job done. The work of our industry and the energy networks is central to our decarbonised future. From the many innovative projects underway to test new solutions, to the system transformation that is needed to deliver electrification and hydrogen. The energy networks are the foundation on which the next phase of delivering net zero will be built. Indeed, our two flagship projects are tackling these two issues head on. Our Open Networks project, it's world leading. It's an industry initiative that's playing a key role in delivering the government's smart systems and flexibility plan. It's helping to transform the way our energy networks operate. It's underpinning the delivery of the smart grid. And through Gasco's Green, we're creating the world's first zero carbon gas grid by speeding up the switch from natural gas to hydrogen for the 23 million households that rely on it in Great Britain. Having started my career in the energy industry in 2006, I know I don't look old enough, and recently rejoined after 7 years out, it is inspiring to see the progress that's been made by our industry at such a rapid pace. Only a few weeks ago, at our industry-leading Energy Networks Innovation Conference, we launched our National Energy Systems Map, which is a digital view of the entire energy network. It's capturing everything that's connected into it. That map is going to help renewable generators, green gas producers, electric vehicle charging point installers, and big energy consumers to plan their investments in and around the infrastructure that they need. This year, we've also turned on the taps to houses running completely on hydrogen in Gateshead, proving that we can get heat, hot water and cook as simply as we can now, but with none of the emissions. Exciting developments like these are only made possible with the right policy and regulation in place. I'm constantly encouraged by the ambition and attention that is coming from all parts of the UK and Ireland on this issue. But now it's time to turn that ambition into reality. Our energy networks are on the leading edge of the global transition to net zero emissions by 2050 and 2045 in Scotland. Tremendous progress has already been made, and COP26 represents a real opportunity to showcase our world-leading energy system, as well as sharing knowledge of how we can all improve. Before I hand over to Guy, I'd like to take a moment just to thank SP Energy Networks for supporting this evening's event and for giving us such a warm welcome here in Glasgow. It's perhaps fitting that the Climate Summit is being held in Glasgow, a city which holds the nickname Dear Green Place. Let's hope that spirit prevails as COP26 concludes. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Guy Jefferson, Chief Operating Officer of SP Energy Networks, to say a few words. Guy.
Thanks very much, Ross, and it really is my pleasure and honour to welcome you all, whether you're joining us in person or virtually, along here to Glasgow, where for the last week the leaders of the world have been gathering, debating, hopefully making agreements and commitments that will positively shape the future. I'm absolutely delighted we're hosting the ENA and the distinguished panellists here today to discuss how energy policy can impact climate change. Our networks are at the heart of that challenge and are key to overcoming many of the barriers to delivering net zero. For those who may not know, SP Energy Networks own and maintain, operate transmission and distribution electricity networks serving over 3.5 million homes and businesses in areas across central and southern Scotland, England and Wales. Our networks are the backbone of reaching net zero targets on time as we facilitate ever increasing amounts of renewable power onto the grid. We've got to prepare for the increase of electrification of transport and heat that's needed in line with the forecasted consumer demand to deliver the UK, Scottish and Welsh Government targets. We are uniquely placed in SP Energy Networks, dealing with all three of those governments across the UK. In our business, we think of transport and heat as the next big electrification opportunity. To hit the UK's government's net zero target by 2050, we'll need in the region of 25 million private electric vehicle chargers and 3 million public chargers across the UK. We'll also need to replace gas boilers in 23 million homes, and I believe that will be done in the majority with electric heat pumps. Network operators and owners within the ENA will be right at the heart of this transformation. We already have about 500,000 electric vehicles on the roads here in the UK, and 32,000 electric cars were registered in September alone, which is almost as many as were registered in the whole of 2019. Our industry is already preparing to ensure we have the necessary infrastructure in place to support more than 30 million EVs on the road by 2040. The lion's share of the increase in electricity demand will be met by the exponential increase in renewable generation. To meet net zero targets, UK renewable energy capacity has to quadruple. We now have a policy commitment of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, which is excellent, and 11 gigawatts of that is due to come from either here on land in Scotland or offshore. However, we now need the network infrastructure in place to support these plans and let the energy flow from north to south before those developments are completed. Without a doubt, as we continue to electrify the UK's economy, the need for smart, flexible and resilient grid networks is more important than ever. I'll bring this to life with a few numbers. Across our network areas here in SP Energy Network, we now know that through our detailed forecasting and modelling work that over the next decade we're going to see a dramatic acceleration of EVs. Up to 1.5 million new EVs in the next 10 years, rising to 3.4 million, and we only cover 15% of the UK's landmass. There will be significant charging infrastructure required to facilitate that growth. Heat in buildings is responsible for 1/5 of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions and a key target for change. So we expect the installation of electric heat pumps alongside hydrogen solutions as an alternative to gas boilers. We will require up to 1.7 million in the next 10 years, rising to 2.6 million by 2050. Our forecasts also show domestic customer generation across our network will almost triple in the next 10 years. The key to this is pace. Customers are already moving more quickly than we thought in our estimations even just a year ago, and the forecast rates I expect will increase. It's time to go further, faster to deliver the required network investment in line with forecasted consumer demand for the uptake of low carbon technologies. This presents some big challenges for us as network operators, as illustrated in the slide. Volume, complexity and security. Decarbonisation will increase power flows well beyond what the network is currently designed for. Networks are becoming more complex and dynamic, especially at lower voltages, which relies on increased monitoring and control functionality. No longer does the power flow just move simply from left to right, from power station to domestic customers. Decarbonisation also means our customers are increasingly dependent on a reliable and secure electricity supply. In the past, they've been very reliant on electricity for their day-to-day needs, but in the future, that will extend to transport and heat also. So while reliability in the UK is world leading, it will actually have to improve in the future years. Believe it or not, some areas of our network are up to 60 or 70 years old, so that aging asset base provides its own challenges in terms of managing the complexity and higher utilisation that's required of it. I'm pleased to say that our asset management technologies and techniques mean that we are better prepared than ever to deliver against these challenges across our transmission and distribution networks, and we aim to invest nearly £5 billion until 2028 to deliver against this challenge. Within all of this, we also believe that a just transition in the energy sector is a great opportunity to make the journey to net zero fair and equitable for all. We want to ensure every community in which we operate benefits from cleaner, greener technology and that no one's left behind. We can't do this alone. We must work in partnership with customers, communities, supply chains, industry and policy makers to make the nation's net zero ambitions both attainable and fair. This also isn't just about electricity infrastructure, as Ross indicated. It's about all networks working together, along with other vectors such as transport and planning, to move forward whole systems approach to deliver the revolution needed to tackle climate change. That brings me to the vital role of policy in leading this green transition. As an industry, it's important that governments we serve and our regulator Ofgem are aligned and strong and clear in terms of their strategic direction. In terms of what it will take to deliver net zero economy by 2050, it's a huge challenge. I should mention 2045 in the devolved nations as well. We therefore welcome the recent publications from UK and Welsh governments of their net zero plans, as well as the Scottish Government's updated climate change plan and Ofgem's decarbonisation action plan, which were both published last year. It's reassuring to see the role that these plans place on the importance of network operators in facilitating bold ambitions. As I said, we are up for that challenge. The role of Ofgem in the net zero transition is absolutely key. We have been calling for some time now for Ofgem to have net zero and interim greenhouse gas reduction targets baked into their statutory objectives. That will provide them with the necessary powers and flexibility to not only continue to protect current and future consumers, but to provide strong regulatory backing to projects at an early stage which are necessary to deliver net zero. We now have an urgent need for speed. Bold planning decisions need to be taken at a rate and ambition which reflects the urgency of the climate emergency. Keeps the UK at the front of the race to net zero. It's not going to be easy, but get it right, and it's a revolution that I believe everyone can get behind. We're committed to investing in the infrastructure and technology needed to make the government's ambitious plans a reality, because I believe it truly benefits all of us. Thank you very much. I'll now ask the panel to come up to the stage and Samira to host. Thank you.
I'm just trying to think. I think just sit wherever you like. Yeah, that's good. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. And let me welcome our wonderful panel. And we're each going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion, but very much a good half hour for you to ask your questions. So we're joined to my immediate left by Malcolm Turnbull, of course, ex-Prime Minister of Australia, and I think some real insights into both his own commitment to kind of green issues, his work now, but also watching the Australian experiment, I think if we can call it that, and the journey it's chosen to take, certainly for the time being. Audrey Zibleman, just a little bit further along there, Vice President of X's electric grid Moonshot project, about which I'm thrilled to be hearing more. Farhana Yamin, can you confirm, first of all, did you coin that phrase?
I didn't coin it. I did come up with the idea in 2013, and it's all documented, and it was a paper commissioned by the French presidency. Excellent. This became the most downloaded paper. So,
well, thrilled to have, as you can tell, a climate policy expert and a person with kind of foresight, and a lawyer as well, and of course Guy Jefferson, who we just heard from. A couple of things I wanted to say before we start, which is, I don't know how many of you saw this morning, there was a really interesting news story about polling carried out, I think, in the US, UK, France and Germany by Cantor Public, looking at public opinion around green issues, and huge acceptance that it's important. But actually, when they ask people, what would you be prepared to sacrifice? What do you think are the kinds of actions that are required? It was, oh, well, recycling and the kinds of things that rely on government and other agencies, and also a reluctance to commit to thinking that there might be fundamental lifestyle changes that might need to be part of this. So I think that's part of the dilemma, isn't it? It's the public side, the policy side, the industry side all working together. And so I thought that was just quite an interesting moment. And I also know that I think it's 500 lobbyists from fossil fuel companies apparently at COP26, outnumbering any individual country's lobbyists here. So we also know part of that bigger picture too. But I think Malcolm Turnbull, why don't we start with you, and 5 minutes to give us your thoughts and set the scene for us.
Okay, well, thank you. And firstly, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much, Scottish Power, for hosting us, and the Energy Networks Association for putting this seminar on. Look, I know everybody is disappointed with Australia's failure to increase its national determined contribution, in other words, its 2030 target at the COP. And that's what this COP was all about. And Australia didn't do that, or the Australian government didn't do that. We can delve into that a little later if you want to get depressed about politics and energy, but I want to say a couple of things. Firstly, contrary to what you see from the political perspective, there is enormous enthusiasm for the energy transition in Australia. Audrey Zibleman on my left, now running, as you've heard, the Google X Moonshot on energy grids, was our energy market operator and played a really leading role in explaining how we actually get to net zero in the energy sector. And of course, the key is renewables, wind and solar. They represent the vast majority of new generation commissioned in Australia. Indeed, Randolph Brazier from the Energy Networks Association, who invited me here, not just an Australian, but a proud South Australian. I know there's a South Australian contingent here as well with the Agent General. South Australia has 70% of its electricity capacity is now renewable, and it's 30% around the world. Australia has, in terms of new renewable deployment per capita, is second only to, wait for it, the Netherlands. It's a fun fact, but it's true. So there's a lot of action going on. Andrew Forrest has been here at the COP, and I've been supporting him in my capacity as chairman of the Green Hydrogen Organisation, talking about the critical importance of hydrogen, really the super fuel that will not only provide energy storage, but above all, enable us to deal with the hard to abate sectors, heavy transport, shipping, cement, steel, and so on. But of course, if you're going to have hydrogen, it's got to be green. There's no point making hydrogen as we do now from gas or coal. It's got to be green. Just remember, the same people who gave you clean coal, remember how Donald Trump used to like saying that? Clean coal. He loved it. It was so good. And they're the same people. No, believe me, it was so good. The same people who gave you clean coal are now talking about clean hydrogen. And what they mean by that is blue hydrogen. What they mean by that is making it in exactly the same way as we do today, with massive greenhouse gas emissions from gas, and then promising to store it under the ground. A process of carbon capture and storage that I can say I have personally spent hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on in the past, and it has almost invariably failed. So what we need is renewable electricity to electrolyse water to produce green hydrogen. But above all, we've got to focus on the crisis within the energy crisis. And that crisis is the need for long duration storage. And the key to that is something that Scotland can deliver probably better than, at least as well as any other part of the world, and that's pumped hydro. You've got the water, you've got the topography, you've got the phenomenal wind resource, you've got the capacity to provide that balancing factor. An old technology, pumped storage, but one that is coming into its own again. And it was great to go up to Kraken yesterday and have a look at that. As you know, I commissioned in Australia, and it's under construction now, Snowy Hydro 2.0. It'll be the biggest pumped hydro scheme in the Southern Hemisphere when it's finished. But there's an opportunity for smaller off-river closed-loop pumped hydro. Absolutely environmentally uncontroversial, and that is something that will make renewables reliable and drive that agenda, that goal, that absolutely necessary goal of the clean energy transition. So it's great to be here, Samira. Thank you so much. And I told you I'd speak for an hour and a half, but by political standards, that was quite short.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Malcolm. Audrey Zibleman, do go ahead.
Sure. So I arrived in Australia in 2017, and when I actually got off the airplane, The Premier of South Australia was actually having an argument on the television with Prime Minister Turnbull's treasurer about a blackout that had happened in South Australia. And from that time until when I left, energy was on the top of the news in Australia. And the reason it is just for what we're saying. Things are just moving so fast there that the need for action was critical. And I left, and I was there sort of at this change. And particularly, and I'm glad Malcolm mentioned South Australia, and we do have a contingent here from South Australia, where the learnings that we had about what it's really going to take to integrate renewables, I think are par none around the world because of the challenges that we're seeing and the opportunities and the changes that we've had to make. So to me, Guy, when you were talking about the complexity, I think one of the things that we have to realize is that this complexity is, it's going to be worldwide. And as a matter of fact, what we need to be thinking about in terms of policy and in terms of where we're headed in decarbonization is the fact that we're not going to get there until we start acknowledging how complex it's actually going to be at a physical nature. And what are we going to do to create the tools that are going to be necessary in order for us to manage the grid? So when I got to Australia, and I think this is a perfect story around why these things change so quickly, our biggest concern was around the peaks of the system and the ability, in fact, in order to have enough generation to meet the peaks. When I left last year, part of the issue was not just the peaks of the system, but actually the belly of what we call the EMU curve, which is the fact that there's so much solar in the afternoon, we don't even have enough energy to keep the grid in balance. And so the lesson from all of that and why I joined X is that in addition to your issues around complexity, the fact that we have aging infrastructure, the fact that we are going to need massive amounts of investment and learnings, is the fact that we need the computational tools to be able to manage a much more complex system. When weather becomes your biggest fuel source, your ability to predict and analyze how weather can affect your grid is going to be really critical. When you have lots of distributed energy resources that are being hooked up at a pace, and I think last one I left, it was one rooftop panel every 90 seconds in Australia, the ability to predict load, the ability to manage load, to think about resiliency becomes increasingly more complex. So what we're working on in our Moonshot, which is now called Tapestry, is, and I was interested, Ross, you mentioned Google Maps. It's actually, think about Google Maps for the grid. How do we make the ability to access information, to be able to see the grid, to be able to anticipate what's going on, and frankly, to give people in the control rooms as well as the market itself the visibility and the analytic capability that they're going to be able to require in order to manage this really the most complex of all complex machines in the world, worldwide, is going to be a requirement that we take artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, all the great tools we have around digitalization and apply it to the grid itself so that grid operators and everybody who rely on them have the capability of seeing it. But the other piece is, when I think about Scottish Power and the reputation that you have as one of the most sophisticated utilities in the world, and you're saying this is going to be hard. You have to think about the rest of the world where we don't have that many great power engineers, where people are trying to even catch up. We were on the phone today with someone in South Africa who was facing yet another load shedding event. How to get them there at the same pace is going to require, again, not only leadership among the industry where like ENA and where everyone here is focused on it, but then how do we do this fast knowledge transfer that we're going to need? So to me, part of what we have to be thinking about is not just domestic policy, but actually where we're going to drive international policy so there can be knowledge exchange, fast learnings, and the tools that are going to allow for standardization so that we can get there as fast as we can. And I'll leave, because I could speak for an hour on this too. But the last piece that I like people to, we talk about 2050 and net zero. I think everyone in the energy industry understands that we're not going to get there until we can decarbonize the grids, because we can't electrify everything unless we clean up the grids, and that we need to do this by 2030. 2050 is way too late. and getting the information and dealing with the social license issues are going to be very critical. So I applaud you for having this, ENA. I think it's terrific, and I'm glad to be here and look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much. And again, just with a couple of images, I think you've given us so much that we can develop in discussion. Farhana next.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you also to Scottish Power, who've hosted also some of the vulnerable countries in this space. And it's the third time I've been in this auditorium. So thank you to all those who are watching too. I guess when I look back, I've been involved in the climate change negotiations since 1991, and this is my 24th COP. I've missed 2. I think most policies have failed. We tried every single one. And the reason why the net zero goal was put in, actually it was a zero goal with slightly less emphasis on the net part, was this last ditch attempt by the small islands, by the vulnerable countries. This wasn't a goal put in by the US or the EU. They were brought to the table as a result of very many complex deals and trade-offs. So this goal of net zero by 2050 was the attempt to put an end date, because there wasn't one, and to put an end date in line with science, because science was resisted in every which way by so many countries, especially those dependent on fossil fuels. So that's where the background to this came from. And as Audrey has said, that it's very much now, I feel less proud of it slightly now, because I'm under a huge amount of attack for putting it in there, because it's being greenwashed a lot by countries and companies alike, and to the point where the UN Secretary General himself, and I think there will be some breakthroughs, I hope, at this conference on putting some integrity into those claims, putting some backbone into what's being pledged and what's being delivered, putting a cap and a limit on the degree to which you'll be able to use offsets. So let me just say those things, because those are the agenda items really on this COP too. I think in terms of policy, I've also been very much part and parcel of the whole attempt to use market mechanisms. So as a lawyer, you learn all these, here are these policy techniques that you can use, here are these tools that you're taught in law school, will be the standard tools for you to use. So command and control, taxes, information, market-based mechanisms and so forth. And we've relied mainly on information, voluntary pledges and markets in the climate regime. And that's why we're where we are. Those have not worked. We have not been able to design carbon markets that are inclusive, fair, and deliver environmental results. And that is why there's such huge resistance to them right now. And I don't think we have time for another 5 years of experimenting. We need to get rid of these toxic gases, and we need to do that in a way which is really equitable globally. And that means providing access to roughly 1.8 billion people who have no modern energy. The majority of young people and the majority of the poorer demographics, even in this country, the UK, do not have cars. They cannot afford EVs. So this is again a question of equity. So I put that forward because I think one of the things I'm trying to do, and many others are trying to do, is put justice as a solution. Justice is a solution to the energy problem, because we know that the vast majority of the emissions, the vast majority of that energy demand curve comes from the richest demographics. Wherever you are, 10% of the world's population, the top 10%, emit more than 50% of the emissions. So the demands for cooling, electricity, transport, all of those things are very disproportionately weighted towards certain demographics and not others. So that is an essential way in which we tackle and accelerate climate action. It isn't a nice to have, that is the way in which we're going to achieve this. And I guess, when you asked me to speak, it's really, you heard it on the streets if you were here in Glasgow or any of the other major cities in the UK. The demand is for climate justice. The demand is for a much fairer system overall of our whole economy. It isn't just something that applies only to climate change, it's applying across the board. Your future customers, your future energy users, your future voters are voting and demanding that the politicians enact much more radical change. So I think policy is going to have to respond to that very different dynamic, to that very different demand. And most policy that will be successful will have to deal with the impacts of climate change, the impacts of climate chaos, which are locked into the system now. So I think we can't just be energy providers. We also have to, at the same time, make sure that the communities that our companies, grids, our headquarters are in are resilient and safe to use, whether it's in floods or through other climatic impacts. And we have to break down this division of labour between the supply side and the demand side and act, I think, in a way which is much more integrated again. And I guess I look back on my life and I think I've probably used up my 5 minutes now.
Finish your point.
Oh, yeah. So actually my first job at age 21 coming out of uni was with a vertically integrated electricity company in the UK called the Central Electricity Generating Board, which owned all of the power stations in the UK, and it owned all of the what's now called the national grid, and it had 12, I think, at that time, regional distribution companies. And to hear now the vast number of energy providers that there will be, that I'm an energy provider, I can feed my electricity into the grid, is like a very different picture. So this sector can cope with vast change in terms of where the electricity is generated, how it's owned, and the regulations under which it must operate. So I look forward to, you all rising to that challenge, us all rising to that challenge together, and looking at this as a global problem. We won't, in my last comment, we won't be able to extract and mine the metals and the minerals that we need for the green revolution in the way that we used to in the old days. So that you see also, again, a huge demand for climate justice coming from the indigenous people whose lands often are the site and the source of the precious metals, the minerals, the hydros that we're calling for. So we can't do this in the same way. We must do it in a much more participatory way, and we have to make sure that our governance systems, first and foremost, are also fairer and hear everybody who's involved and must be involved in designing new policies.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, we've already had some great questions, and do start submitting your questions at any point and we'll start answering them quite soon. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. I mean, you just talked about, we can't do things a certain way. The trouble is, it often feels, by looking at news coverage, that too often, for example, extractions of metals and minerals are just being done in the same old ways, and that the market drive is affecting too many, not just industries, but the whole climate in which they operate in terms of government policy. New coal mines being opened up, whether it's Australia or here in the UK. I just wonder, what's your thought about how we break what seems to be still an enduring, problem, which is a short-term sort of financial gain thinking, and from a political point of view as well, they're thinking about the next election, aren't they? Jobs in that constituency and so on.
I think the good thing, look, from my perspective, I've always acted for, and I'm an environmental champion, and acted for the vulnerable communities, is they are taking direct action, and it's very organised, increasingly well organised. So it's many of the actions that are being done in the UK today is against the headquarters or the offices of companies that are undertaking extractive or human right abusive, and that's just going to increase. I mean, that is going to increase, and that's because our political systems have failed. So social movements are able to knit together with the same technologies, the globalized means of communication, and they're also vertically integrating or horizontally integrating, or both, actually. Mm-hmm. And that gives me a great deal of hope, but it means that there's a bigger challenge for all your boards, all the decisions that you make, and whether they're legislated for or not, that action will happen. So you're going to see, more and more people gluing themselves or putting themselves on the line, and that's sort of regrettable, but it's also part of the change that is needed to really shake up the system. The system hasn't been able to change internally without that pressure.
Okay, Audrey.
Yeah, I think that it's our ability to do this is going to be really challenging. And I don't think we should at all be shy about saying how complex it's going to be. Part of the problem we have with, particularly in energy, is that it's such, our entire economies are dependent on what we do. I mean, everyone who runs a power grid knows that 99% of the time, nobody knows who they are. And when they go to a party and they say what they do, people say, oh, I want to go talk to someone else. Until there's an outage, in which case everybody knows who they are. Yeah. And you get a lot of company. And I think one of the things that I worry about is data that shows that the population, while they're very concerned about climate change, as soon as there's a massive blackout or a massive price event, that sentiment changes very quickly. And so I think our task, in order to make decarbonization occur and not compromise price, reliability, and access, is very difficult. And so one of the things that I think is going to be important is how do we get really information out there so everybody can understand the nature of the challenge. And when we think about having to build more transmission than we've ever built before in this generation, and the social license issues that everybody in this room probably knows around transmission, we're not going to get there unless we have ways to talk about this and show people the alternative.
The social issues around transmission.
The social license issues, yeah, because everybody, when we talk about, like in the US, the amount of massive dollars that are going to go around interconnecting new renewables, I know in Australia, there's massive issues around that. So everyone likes these things in concept, until they're the ones who have to deal with it in their neighbors and in their backyard or visibility. And so I think the way we're going to have to solve this is getting better information, getting better scenario analysis, technology that people are certain that we're optimizing everything we can do and doing things as efficiently as we can. But the challenge is going to be speed, right? And I think, while we are talking about extraction, building a transmission line can take 10 to 15 years. And so we have to start thinking about how do we move policies and get people to appreciate the amount of infrastructure. And I think this starts with getting better information, better scenario analysis, and being able to share it so that it's not just the utilities who understand the nature of the complexity, it's actually politicians, local individuals, and everyone in between.
Can I get Guy and then Malcolm's thoughts as well on this? Because there seems to be this fundamental tension over relative short-term thinking in terms of profit and the longer-term commitment required, particularly for, as Audrey was saying, infrastructure.
Yeah, and Audrey's absolutely right. In terms of planning, this is a huge issue for us. And I'm a great believer in going to your stakeholders and making sure you're consulting properly, but the way that it's set up in the UK, it's not efficient, and 10 years is too long. We talked about we've not got much time, we've not got any time left. We can't take 10 years to put, whether it's a wind farm or whether it's a transmission line, we just don't have the time anymore. But recognising that we need to manage stakeholders. I mean, to return to a point that you made right up front, Samira, associated, we've just been out on a huge consultation exercise for our new investment plan, which I mentioned. We're looking to spend up to $5 billion. We've talked about what our customers and stakeholders believe are the right thing to do, and that's 88%. We're absolutely 100 behind the net zero concept and the fact that they need to do something. But when you turn that into the reality of what something is, then that is a challenge. We're doing our best to communicate that and what that would mean for people, but it's a challenge. We won't give up. We've got to keep going, and I think it's absolutely essential in our communities. We work in our communities every day. We listen to our communities. They want to build their own energy systems. They want to contribute, which is fantastic. And again, the policies that governments have, Scotland, Wales, and the UK, there's not enough investment going into community energy either. That's another area that we definitely think needs more investment, and we're happy to contribute to that in terms of giving the appropriate advice so people can understand. Because there is one thing we haven't mentioned yet is is skills and knowledge. There's a deficit of that as well, which we really need to try and help fill. And businesses have a real part to play in that, to make sure that people have the information that they need to start to build their own community energy schemes, for example. And I think the enthusiasm is out there for that, and we need to try and feed that. Malcolm,
what are your thoughts on this as someone with real political experience of dealing with those tensions?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the politics, the big problem in Australia has been that climate policy became turned into a political identity issue. And, you know, so that people, whether you believed or disbelieved in global warming, became like a partisan issue. Now, that hasn't happened in the UK. It certainly has happened in the United States. But you see, saying you believe in global warming is as stupid as saying you believe in gravity, right? I mean, it's a thing. Doesn't matter, you know, doesn't matter what your thoughts are on gravity. If you jump out the window from the first floor, it will have a material impact on you. So and we're seeing this with global warming. I think in terms of the energy transition, the key is information and up-to-date information. Not enough people yet realise that renewables are cheaper. I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? You can have your climate action cake and eat it too. You can have cheap electricity, reliable electricity, and zero emission electricity all at once. That wasn't what we thought 20 years ago. Quite the contrary. So we've got this terrific opportunity, but all we need is planning. And, you know, that's where Audrey's ISPs were so excellent. I really encourage you to have a look at the AEMO integrated system plans. It's exactly what you need. You've got to work out how much storage you need, you know, how much new generation you need. You've got to set out what new transmission you need. But then it is up, you know, and you can debate that and make a decision, but then you've got to get on and build it. Now, there is one really important temporal asymmetry that relates to this that I want to stress. You can build solar and wind really fast. I mean, the fact is, if you have a planning permit, you could build a solar farm in 6 months from placing your order. You know, I mean, we used to say we just need a post hole digger, a cement mixer, and an Allen key to put one up. It's actually even easier than that. If you go to the Australian Pavilion, you'll see there's reference to a company called 5B, you know, B for Billy, which has these concertina-like prefabricated solar panels. They roll out of containers like a, you know, yeah, just it's extraordinary. Anyway, I hasten to add I'm a shareholder in it, as is AES. It's got declaration of interest. But what I mean is there's innovation at every level. But if you want to build a pumped hydro scheme, even one that is off river and doesn't involve, you know, big environmental issues, it takes time. It takes planning, permitting, steel, concrete, digging holes, you know. I used to say this when I was involved in the broadband network. Moore's law does not apply to digging holes, right? It still takes a long time. And so unless you've got to get ahead of it. And so the critical, this is why I call it the crisis within the crisis. So you've got to explain to people why we need to make the investment decisions now, because there is unfortunately a sort of a there's two things going on. There's what Australians would call she'll be right, which is, you all understand what that means. And then there's the Macauberism, which I guess was what Scott Morrison was talking about when he was saying new technologies are going to save us. In other words, something will turn up. We have the tech to do the job now. But what we need to do is replace ideology and idiocy with engineering and economics. And that requires politicians being honest about it, getting the facts out and explaining them.
Fantastic, thank you. Can I ask all of you what your thoughts are, how far you've been able to watch COP26 discussions and decisions to date, and anything that stands out for you? Farhana first.
Well, I would love the engineers to really get together with the planners, the architects and the construction industry. That's the two big disconnects that's not happening. And obviously with the information, you know, sitting here, And I guess, you know, I sort of like look at things from above, and these conversations are not happening. So you can massively reduce the demand for electricity through better city design, planning, all of those concepts that we tried out during COVID, right? Because we were all grounded for the best part of a year and a half in some cases. So the circular economy, the local economy, community-based approaches to living, they massively reduce the need for us to build power stations and grids. So you take a lot of that away, and they're having, you know, Built Environment Day. I think it's in a day or two time. I've sort of lost track of time. So those disciplines, those professions, we all need to come together. And they don't have deep pockets to market and lobby and buy 100 delegates to come here, or let alone 500 to come here. And all of these are showing us that we can do it. We can accelerate, build better homes. By and large, people will be in urban areas all across the world. We already are, and people are happier there. But they can have better lifestyles, better health, as long as they make some changes. And I guess going back to that survey that you quoted, there are, you know, lifestyle changes are the fastest thing of all, actually, if the public is taken, you know, along the way. So changes in diets, changes in travel, changes in commuting, changes to how whether you drive and whether you choose to have holidays abroad, and all of those things can take away a lot of emissions, basically.
Yeah, and those are the ones that people are at the moment most.
Yeah, and they want to do that in many countries, and obviously in many other countries, huge swathes of the population never have access to those emissions in the first place, so they can avoid those. And that's where the big demand shift goes down, and then you can meet it through all of the technologies that are sitting here.
Can I just ask, could we get a couple of bottles more water, just because it's quite thirsty up here, just particularly for those who've got empty glasses? If we could make that priority, that would be really great. Thank you so much. Did you else want to contribute on this? Do you want to go next, Guy?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what's important for me out of this is we keep the level of publicity, if that's the right word, or the challenge we have in terms of climate change up there after the COP, because the concern, I mean, I'm involved with Sustainable Glasgow, we sit on the board. What we've always talked about is a great opportunity to get this up the agenda, but the real power is keeping it up there afterwards. And I wonder whether we're in a little bit of a bubble here in Glasgow, because, you know, Glasgow's quite buzzing with all of this going on, and while you're in that bubble, then you think that everybody must be listening, this must be, going around the world, etc. And that, but we probably are in a bubble, and it's not. And I'm just concerned that after COP is over, we don't keep it up at the level it needs to be. So I guess that's I'd like to see a commitment to try and keep it up the agenda and keep the pressure on, if you like, because I don't think we're going to get everything that we would like from a political point of view at the end of these 2 weeks. But I hope for some more good news over the next few days. But again, back to the community piece, that's very important for us, and it's something that we've worked very hard with Glasgow about, and I agree with you 100% that I could throw as much cable and transformers onto the system as I could possibly manage over the next 20 years, and it wouldn't be enough to deliver the amount of power that we need to deliver what we need in terms of decarbonisation and, you know, managing smart networks, better utilising what we've got, working together to be more efficient is 50% of the challenge, I think. And if we can do that better, then that's in parallel with building the network up and doing the other things we've talked about. I think that would be extremely important.
Audrey, you want to go next, and then Malcolm?
Yeah, so I think that the announcements that we've heard during the course of the week, and I do agree, there's certainly an excitement, and hopefully, Malcolm, you're right. We're going to get past the identity politics. I remember you were at a National Press Club event, said the same thing. We need to get this decision made by economics and engineering, not by policy. So I think a couple things. One is will be really important is if you take every community around the world where there is electricity, and people did have the tools to be able to develop their decarbonization plans, and that they could be agreed to as a source of truth. I mean, one of the values we had as AEMO, because we're an independent entity, we actually did develop a plan. And in Australia, because coal can no longer compete with renewables, it was incumbent for us to understand, because the coal plants are retiring because they can't compete. And we, as a grid operator, had to figure out, well, what kind of investments are we going to need to get in ahead of the coal retirements in order to manage the system? So we came out with a blueprint that then became used just to think about how to build against. And that doesn't solve all of the problems, but people are no longer really debating whether coal can compete. People in the industry, there are some people that we don't talk about very much who are still debating it. But and people are not really debating that the solution is some combination of wind, solar, and storage, including pumped hydro and battery storage. It's just that then it becomes a difficult question, the how, building, getting it done, who pays for it, that becomes very important. But I think that having the capability, frankly, I think for the energy networks to provide these kind of blueprints for the future so that people can see, they can make choices, and then we can drive innovation forward will be a really critical piece. So I would think this COP would be successful if we can get past people saying around the targets and actually requiring people to show the how. And then the how has got to be, what are the plans, how much, and where you're going to put them, when do they need to go in? And then also, I think, frankly, we have to start talking about how are we going to do the exits against fossil, because the other piece that we don't talk about is that a lot of the communities where fossil plants are located, they are usually their largest source of income and revenue. And so we do have issues around equity. I know before I joined AEMO as the chief regulator in New York, and we were really struggling with the fact that a lot of our coal plants were in communities that they represented 80% of the income, 70% of the jobs. And so just saying we're going to shut them down wasn't, we had to have a plan B.
Yeah, coming quickly, Farhana.
Yeah. So the Paris Agreement has language on a just transition, and the concept of a just transition is really important. And we've had one committee spending one day in the UNFCCC, in the Paris Agreement, as it were, discussing this. And that's appalling. So there are companies, including Scottish Power, many others, including some European countries, have stepped up and started working within a just transition framework. But the Paris Agreement has language on climate justice and just transition. It's just that we haven't done very much about it, because we need to improve our governance structures and take communities with us. But why don't we do that? It's because we have 500 delegates saying that's not important and spend all the time discussing the needs of us, us as fossil fuel companies, us as fossil fuel states. And we still can't get, the COP to agree a coal phase out, even though it's not economic almost anywhere in the world. So I'm just expressing why it doesn't happen. And I feel it's important for us as an audience, for you and everyone watching, to now be more active and say what you can and can't deliver, and kind of be a champion for climate action. It's not possible just to be neutral about this anymore. You have to speak up against the huge vested interests that are still trying to say, let's deliver it through supply side, let's buy the offsets, let's carry on, putting in all these stations. To say it to your counterparts all around the world, you're also a global industry.
Yeah. Can I just bring in Malcolm first, and then I'll come back to you, Audrey. Your thoughts on
that? Thank you. Let me start with energy efficiency and then go to just transition. Look, I am a huge supporter of energy efficiency. I've supported it and championed it in government. And I think, a lot of our built environment is very energy inefficient. You've got uninsulated houses in the UK and lots of other places. A lot of our built environment in Australia was built as though we were actually in England. And so, whereas in Australia, you want to have, verandas, shade, breezeways and that sort of thing, and so, you can do a lot to save energy in the built environment and everywhere. But remember Jevons paradox. William Stanley Jevons was a British economist. In fact, I think he might have been Scottish, actually. Someone will have to Google that. But he had a job out in New South Wales, which is why we like to claim him. But he was the one that pointed out that as technology makes a source of energy more efficient and cheaper, while people will get more output for a given unit of energy, because it has a greater output, per unit of energy, they will then use more energy. And this is called Jevons paradox. So I just put that as a little footnote question mark about energy efficiency. Yes, we may use energy more efficiently, but that may lead us to use more energy. Second point I'd make about energy efficiency is we have got to electrify everything, right? That's going to need a lot more electricity. We want to make green hydrogen. That's going to need a lot more electricity. So, frankly, while we can make changes in our lives and our buildings and so forth, get public transport rather than drive, walk rather than get public transport. These are all good things to do, but whichever way you slice or dice it, we are going to need a lot more electricity. That's a fact, and it's got to be clean electricity. So that's my observation there. Now, on just transition, Farhana, look, I tell you, in mining areas, they hate the term just transition. It sounds deadly. It is really, politically, it is borderline toxic. What you've got to do,
Why though?
Well, I'll tell you why, because it sounds like some kid with an iPad's going to get my job and I'm going to be, left washed up on the beach. What you need to do is ensure, as governments and as businesses, need to ensure in those communities where coal-fired generation is going out or coal mining is going out, that there are good, as Joe Biden said, good, well-paid union jobs in the new industries of the future. That's what it's all about. It's about jobs and opportunity. And sort of a just transition sounds like, I regret to say, in many communities, a good sort of retrenchment bonus paid to the workers that are being laid off. You've got to make sure there's a future. And now, there's a lot of ways to do that. Obviously, in any area where there's a lot of coal-fired generation, there is a lot of transmission, which has all been put in place, billions of dollars spent on it. So anywhere where there's a lot of transition, you should be focused on renewable generation. Now, that might be wind, it might be hydro. Pumped hydro is another opportunity. In the, say, Hunter Valley in New South Wales, again, complex, long story, but there are already plans, projects underway to put in a lot of solar and to use some of the old pits as, the lower pond for a pumped hydro, so, to provide that. Got to use your imagination. I mean, the fundamental problem with the Rust Belt in the United States, or indeed in other parts of the world, is that it exists. Governments have got to take the lead and ensure that communities are not left behind. And that's, so, this is all about planning. It's planning, engineering and economics, and a bit of heart. That goes a long way too. And recognising that, yes, people want to be treated justly, of course, but they also want a future. They want an exciting, prosperous future for their kids. It's all very well to be 55 and lose your job at the coal-fired power station because it closes, and get a pension and, that's great, go fishing. But what about your kids and your grandkids? So that's what we've got to do. We've got to provide the exciting, prosperous jobs of the future. Now, the great thing about renewable energy, of course, is that the fuel source is free. And so we can have plenty of it. And that's the vision that we need. That's just an old politician giving some practical advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Got lots of great questions. Can I just follow up with one that's come for you, given what you just said? Malcolm, knowing what you do today, would you have made different decisions when you were Prime Minister?
Yeah, I'm bound to have done. I certainly wish we hadn't spent as much money on carbon capture and storage. Having said that, you never know these things until you try it. Yeah, look, yes, the answer is yes. I mean, I wish we'd moved more urgently. You know, the tragedy of the Australian political climate story is that in 2007, when John Howard's, 12 years old government, still a good government, I thought, but, obviously John and the government were getting long in the tooth. When we went to the 2007 election, our platform included an emissions trading scheme. In fact, the first bit of legislation to underpin the Australian emissions trading scheme, the National Greenhouse Gas Emission Reporting Scheme, ENGAS, that legislation was moved in the House of Representatives by my good self as John's Environment Minister. Because of all the convulsions that occurred and Tony Abbott and the whole right-wing move against climate action, an emissions trading scheme is the most highly charged third rail in Australian politics today. And yet in 2007, both our side of politics and the Labor Party supported it. So, there were opportunities. Those of you who don't follow Australian politics, why would you? There's plenty of gore and violence on network television. But there was a moment when we could have got an emissions trading scheme passed through the Parliament in a straightforward way when Rudd was still PM, and I was overthrown as leader. I've been overthrown twice over climate policy. It's quite impressive, really. I'm sort of a recidivist, I suppose. But on that occasion, I was overthrown. There were still some Liberal senators who supported me who were prepared to vote for it, to vote for this policy that had been our policy, was still Labor's. And do you know who refused to support it and ensured it went down? The Greens. Hooray. Once again, there are none so pure as the impotent, and they, preferring their conception of the perfect to the good, we didn't get an emissions trading scheme which, had it been passed at the end of 2009, would have been part of our fiscal landscape and about as interesting as the goods and services tax. So, I wish we'd been able to manage that better, but I can tell you, wrangling people in the Australian Parliament is hard.
Yeah, no, thank you for that reflection. Right, so we've got 4 great questions. I'm going to see if we can get through them all. This is from Jonathan Collins, how do we move past the debate of electrification versus hydrogen to ensure a rollout of all technologies which will be required to hit net zero? Who wants to go first?
I'll go on that one. This is what I was alluding to. I think what we need to do is we need to get the information out there so that there can be a single source of truth and that people can believe in. And that's our focus in Tapestry, is to actually create that capability so everyone sees the same thing. It's an actual version of the grid and the energy systems. Version, it is the system, as opposed to a model of the model, so that, frankly, information democracy becomes a key piece, because then policymakers, grid owners, and people who are investing have the capability actually to do the scenario analysis and show what's the least path. I think the thing that's going to be really important to keep in mind, it's no longer a question of whether decarbonization renewables are more expensive. We know they're cheaper. It's a question of how do we do it most efficiently. And certainly starting with local communities is important. Everything we can do around integrating distributed resources and managing them effectively will be very important. But to think that we can do it without investments on the grid itself, I think, is a fool's errand. I don't think that the hydrogen debate versus the electricity debate is really a debate. I think at this stage, the technology is such that we know that there's a huge value in green hydrogen as a fuel source for aluminum and other types of requirements. It's just not there yet in terms of the economics for electricity, but that doesn't matter because it will get there. We just don't have to debate about that. We just do need to move towards electrifying everything, developing green hydrogen. A lot of places in the world that's going to be their only choice, and moving on both. The fact is that this is such a huge amount of capital that needs to be spent. For us to be wasting time on thinking and debating on who comes first, I think is sort of foolish.
Malcolm.
Just one very quick observation. Whether you think hydrogen fuel cells are going to win the day with light passenger vehicles or EVs, it's kind of beside the point. The reality is the demand for green hydrogen is so massive, and it will get, the market will sort that out, frankly. I mean, the Japanese and Korean car makers are very committed to hydrogen fuel cells, but are also doing EVs. I mean, I think the market will decide, but, if you want to have green ammonia to make fertilizers, you're going to need hydrogen, green hydrogen. If you want to have a green fuel for shipping, you're going to need green hydrogen. So the green steel's going to need green hydrogen. So there are so many unquestionable big areas of demand for green hydrogen that we just have to get on and get cracking with it. And this is what Andrew Forrester's committed to do, of course, and others. And then in those areas, in the sort of slightly contested area, I think the market will work it out. And you may well have both. You may well have some in one jurisdiction and another in another.
Guy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think we've waited for too long for something better to come along, and it's maybe stopped us moving at the pace that we needed to with electrification. I would say that being a networks business, but I think that there's been a lot of concern about stranded assets as well. If you invest in these assets, who's to say they'll be used? They will be used. As I said before, even if we went full pelt with every resource we have and threw as much cable in the ground and put as many transformers in the network and as many transmission lines as we possibly could, it wouldn't be enough. We need other vectors to help, and we need to be efficient and reduce the amount of energy that we're using, per person at the same time. So I think we need to. Hydrogen will be used definitely in a number of applications, but we need to move now and not delay at all.
Thank you. I want to put two questions together now, because they're both kind of on similar lines. How can customers who in the majority do not even understand what net zero is make an informed decision of what is needed? Surely a role for government, then delivered by regulators. And another angle on the same thing, from Mark Summerfield of REA. Is it realistic to expect energy consumers to get involved in energy flexibility requiring significant levels of behavioural change? Or is flexibility and the energy transition just something that has to be done to consumers through automation? You're smiling at that, Audrey. Into an idea.
I've debated these issues for a long time. I think customers fundamentally are always, when it comes as energy users, it's this for them. That's the same product. They want to be able to put on a switch and the product to be there. I don't think they really want more complexity in their lives. We're all sort of time poor as it is. What I think will happen is we'll have different businesses that continue to simplify it. And what's really happening is with renewables, energy is becoming less of a commodity and is more of a service. And you can create services around flexibility. So if people, to me, one of the advantages is as you create different business models. So particularly vulnerable customers, because we don't want them last in the chain, and they can't go out and buy. I always love it when people in Silicon Valley brag to me about their solar and their Teslas. I think that's very nice for you. Well, what about everybody else? And so the question is how do we create better business models so we can make homes more efficient, give people who otherwise couldn't afford it the best appliances and solar on the roof and batteries, and actually make them part of it without them necessarily making their life more complex, which gets back to the fact that regulation, policy, and markets need to very much align with this going forward. So I think discussions here around flexibility markets and what do they look like will be very important. But I think in the end, for me, it's from the consumer standpoint, is how do we drive the incentives to create the business models so that it's actually easy for consumers to participate through third parties and aggregators rather than asking them to start to become day traders for energy.
Yeah, thank you. Farhana, did you want to?
I guess, look, in the end, I feel this is largely a problem of politicians and governments. It shouldn't be for individual businesses. It shouldn't be for consumers to do this. And I'm very honest, my own personal journey, I started, as I said, at the age of 21 with a massive privatization agenda in this country. And so in some senses, we've created the policy lacuna. We've created the regulatory lacuna. We've had very weak regulators who have not put energy efficiency, who have not put least cost demand options on the agenda, and we've said the market will take care of it, or the technologies will compete and they'll win out, assuming the hidden hand of the market. You know, Adam Smith was also a Scot, and we have the Scots have a lot to account for in terms of the mess the world is in as a result. No, it's harsh, but it needs to be said. And it's being said that this era now, we're coming to the end of that realization that the market doesn't fix things. It also generates vast inequalities and power imbalances, and those drive what wins out. And we're at that point where the Earth is in a crisis as a result of putting the market, and that technologies will somehow compete and win out. The best one will win out. That's not the case, dudes. The most powerful ones are winning out. And that is something that governments need to tackle. And that's what the demand for putting, as I said, those interests that do not have the deepest pockets, the loudest voices, the most sophisticated lobbying and marketing efforts going on in positions of power, and rooting out those who should not be there. Because they do not serve the national interest, they do not serve the long-term interest, they do not serve consumer interest. So I'd like to make that point, because I feel that it needs to be said to.
You've certainly made
a lot of the, and that's still the case also in countries that have a nationalized system, that these are very powerful actors who are distorting the market.
Well, you lead on beautifully to another question, which is coming from Paul O'Brien. How do we make sure the best solutions are shared across the world and lessons are learned on what does and doesn't work? Malcolm, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thank you. Governments actually do not pay nearly enough attention to what is happening in other parts of the world. I mean, even in Australia, our federal government doesn't pay enough attention to what the states are doing in common policy areas, let alone what's happening in other jurisdictions. People in business tend to be very global. You may have a retailing business in Scotland, for example, but you will be keenly aware of what the innovations are in other parts of the world. Politics is very local, it's very parochial, there's not enough awareness of experience. I think COVID has been a difference, because everyone's been facing exactly the same problem at exactly the same time. But the truth is, whether it's energy or environment, healthcare, in every country in the world, we're facing comparable countries. Some countries are extremely comparable, particularly if they're at the same stage of development. So yeah, I think there is a real role for the NGOs, for the civil, the civic sector, if you like, to make sure that the experience in other markets and other countries is known everywhere, because there's no point making the same mistake as somebody else has done. And I've always believed that plagiarism in public policy is the sincerest form of flattery. So if you see somebody doing, fixing a problem better than you, then just go out and do the same, or tweak it or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. But it is the parochialism of government and public policy is right at the heart of it, and people keep making the same mistakes again and again.
Can I tag a question on to that as well for you? But go ahead, Audrey.
This is actually goes to the heart of what we're talking about when we talk about grid digitalization.
Yeah.
So when I was in Australia, we ran into a problem on the grid where we suddenly saw oscillation issues that are happening that we couldn't anticipate. And I called my colleagues in California and Texas, and they said, yes, we saw the same issues. And that's what we can't do anymore. We have to start thinking about when we have the capability of using AI and machine learning, and it doesn't happen in other industries anymore where there is digitalization, where the learnings that we could have in, as Scottish Power has, can be transferred actually through AI and machine learning to other grids, so that everyone can do fast learnings. And I think that the computational capabilities, there's some good news around decarbonization. We have the ability to use technology faster and deploy it faster than we ever had before. What we need to do is allow frankly, the utilities to be able to change their business model so that they're able to make decisions and innovate a lot more easily and actually take learnings from experiences from others and apply new technologies faster. So I think that this is a time where it is going to have to be not just changing what we do, but actually change how we do business. And, in our part of the industry on innovation, we say we can't have more pilots, more RFPs, because it's just killing our ability to move fast.
Yeah. One quick thing, if you can take it very quickly, Audrey, is just someone's pointing out, how will we ensure trust in this data-centric world which controls consumers' power? When people start to mistrust the big IT companies, what do we need to put in place now?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is make sure that, we have good data governance and good rules that go into place around how information, and again, this is more system information than individual information, that has to be used. So I think, these are some of the challenges, or what the way I would like to look at is, what are the issues we need to deal with? We definitely need data governance. We need to make sure that people are aware how information is going to be used and be protected. We need to address cybersecurity issues in a way that we've never done before. But we all have to get on with all of this
at the same time
and get it done.
Cool. A question I wanted specifically to give to you, Guy, just as we're in the last minute or so, is where can you see policy holding back climate action? Because that's sort of been an underlying theme throughout this discussion. The will is there in kind of good companies and industry, but there are policy things that are holding you back, aren't there?
So I'd probably say a couple of things. We've mentioned it before, but planning is definitely one of them. We can't take 10 years to plan the next major infrastructure investment. We don't have the time, so I think that's definitely one. I think the other is working very closely with our regulator. We need to get on and do the investment. We need to be incentivised. I would say that again, being a networks business, but it's not really all about being allowed what we want in terms of revenues. It's about creating the right incentives, and the businesses will come. But we need to earn that through that incentive, be targeted, and then we can move a lot quicker, I think.
Do you know, what you've just said makes me think of the whole row ongoing about the water utility companies who have no incentive to stop putting sewage into our rivers and making huge profits at the same time. Farhana, do you have any closing thoughts on this?
No, I think we need to think as if we were nationalised, in this sector, what other sector we would be. That doesn't mean legally do it, but I think it means putting the longer term interest first instead of, the mandate of each particular company as a private entity. And I think that's where the big mismatch is. We also haven't discussed the role of the financial sector, which is huge, which is basically setting the wrong incentives for every company in the world. And that is the biggest policy, lever that we have right now, which is, again, not being sufficiently addressed at this conference.
Well, I wanted to give final word to Malcolm before I hand to Ross, which is, you've seen what it's like to try and get things done as a Prime Minister. You care passionately about these issues and you're doing what you can now. Do you have any insight into it? Farhana's point particularly, I feel like after the 2008 crash, there was a big sign there that something was fundamentally wrong with the system, and yet it seems ultimately it got rescued, and it's now driving the fact that action on climate change is still so sluggish in a way.
Look, thank you. I am speaking to you as somebody that has actually nationalised the means of production. So I have fulfilled the socialist objective in Australia by ensuring the Commonwealth government, the national government, bought out the other shareholders in Snowy Hydro. Now, of course, there were also other governments, so it's probably not really fulfilling the socialist objective. But look, there is clearly a role for government, but I would not be too sceptical about the market. What the market needs is rules. If you set the regulations right, if you get the incentives right, so you say, we need to have so much storage. Let's say we need to have X, gigawatt hours of storage. Audrey, market operators decided that, and you then say, right, we want, put your hands up, whoever offers us that capacity at the least price, will get paid. And you just use the market rules because competition is good. You don't, I did quite a bit of business in Russia post the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I can tell you, the VI Lenin umbrella factory was not exactly a model of production. And you want to get the private sector competing, but the government has to set the rules so that the competition gets the best outcome for the public. So, I don't think government as an owner, government as a nationaliser, although I did do that with Snowy, but special case, is not the answer. The answer is getting all of that ingenuity working for the consumer, but making sure, and for the outcome, i.e. net zero as fast as we can, but making sure that the rules deliver the outcomes you want. So, that's and you've got to work out what you want, and then make sure the rules, the market rules, we're talking about electricity networks, obviously now, are designed to give you that outcome and at as quickly and as affordably as possible. And I think that's something that can be done. I've talked about storage. You can talk about, like, for example,
briefly,
supporting green hydrogen and not falling for blue hydrogen. Okay, that's one thing.
I am going to let Farhana just come back in there very briefly for the final word, because I could see you looked.
I think my 25-year-old self, which was at COP1, believed that governments would set the rules. Yeah. And what I've witnessed in my lifetime, and what led me to throw myself and glue myself to Shell, was a complete abuse of the system. And the inability to write those rules, and the behind the scenes disinformation, denial, and watering down, and outright lobbying against those rules. So, and that's what I think we need to confront. That is the reality of our political systems. And so we can set the rules. I want governments to do what they're supposed to be there for, and we should all, work together to do that.
Agree with you.
Thank you. I think we haven't solved everything, but I feel we've grappled with everything in this discussion. Can I thank our wonderful panelists, Malcolm, Audrey, Farhana, and Guy, and I'm going to hand over now to Ross. But a big hand for our panelists.
Fantastic. What a debate, what a discussion that was. I think we could go on all night if we kept going. That was really fantastic. And I'm told that 200 people in this room and online have been joining us tonight, which is just brilliant. It's certainly the hottest ticket in town today. And in fact, I'm told, rumour has it, that Obama flew in just to listen to this. But unfortunately, you couldn't get a ticket because it was sold out. But there is good news, because you will be able to get it online from tomorrow. Check out energynetworks.org. And also, while you're there, you can have a little look at our other events. We've got lots coming up. Little plug for you there. And follow us on Twitter, @EnergyNetworks. There you go. What an inspiring and engaging discussion. There's certainly plenty of opportunity to come out of COP26, and it is only the start. In fact, it's kind of the middle. We need to be doing some of this stuff now. It is all happening really fast. We need to be able to keep up with that. And you saw from the debate tonight, there are lots of different angles that we just didn't have time to explore. Perhaps this is the energy industry's iPhone moment, when we move from it just being there in the background, just handling our calls, to actually something that we engage with and that we deal with, and that it becomes a part of our everyday lives and that we carry with us around the room. So thank you to our panel, to Malcolm, to Audrey, to Farhana and Guy, and to our chair, Samira. If we can all just give another great big round of applause. Thank you. And to the incredible team behind the scenes at SPEN here, a massive round of applause to them. They've been working on events all throughout COP, and I know that this has been a real sort of whirlwind for them as well. So thank you to them for their help and support. And of course to you, our audience here and at home, all 200 of you, thank you for joining us for the event. If you're in the room, then please do join us for networking afterwards. And if you're at home, I'm sure you can raise a glass of water or your tipple of choice, a whiskey perhaps. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. And thank you once again to our panel.